Hey, what's up everyone? Dylan's Hobbies here. I finally finished Elden Ring after playing 124 hours of it. Finally finished playing it. I am one of those people that just obsessed with like exploring every corner that I can and just refusing to use guides. That's just kind of how I play. Full disclaimer, I've played Sekiro, Dark Souls 1, Dark Souls 2, and Dark Souls 3. So I am kind of a From Software fanboy. But I'm gonna do my best to be as neutral as possible. So how I'm gonna do this is I'm gonna list some pros, list my cons, and pretty much discuss those things. And at the end, answer the question: is Elden Ring worth the hype? Let's get into it. Just a heads up, the footage that you'll be seeing is pretty much just like the first, probably couple hours that I played the game, so there shouldn't be any spoilers. I pretty much didn't show you the whole thing, so the game is a lot bigger than what's being shown here in terms of like the footage and stuff, but I'm doing that in this way to just make sure there's no spoilers. So starting off with our pros, the first thing I have is that the map is huge. As I was talking earlier, took me 124 hours to get through the game. The map has a lot of hidden things, and pretty much every single corner has something to be explored. Really, there's nothing in the game that doesn't have a purpose in there for the most part, and that doesn't even like start to pretty much cover the fact that the map also has an underground area. Like the world I thought was already big to begin with, but nope, it was pretty much like twice the size. So if you're really into open world games, or if something that just being able to immerse yourself in a whole new world is up your alley, you're not afraid to just kind of go and explore as much as you can. It does a great job at doing that without really making it feel like really mundane or repetitive, really. And I do have to say, I have to give a lot of praise to the creators for having that underground section, or just having a more vertical world building again. We haven't really experienced something like that since back in Dark Souls 1, and I think if you haven't ever experienced Dark Souls 1 before, I think this is a great place for you to pick up playing a From Software game, just so that you can really experience that praise that people were giving to Dark Souls 1 for having that super creative vertical top-down world building. And talking about the big map, they were able to still implement dungeons into this game. I think that's really cool. I feel like for me, Dark Souls always felt a little bit missing, just because of the way how kind of linear, or actually vertical, the game is. And I think that there's you pretty much you don't really get that much choice in what you do, and they really have like a missed opportunity to include something like dungeons in the game. And I think Elden Ring, they were able to implement something closer to like a dungeon by adding caves or catacombs, or adding certain areas that pretty much, yeah, it feels like this is a dungeon, like a traditional dungeon. I gotta do this, get through it, and I think that's really fun. So that's definitely a pro. I mean, I think with a lot of these pros, there are going to be cons that come with them. I'll talk about that as the review goes on, when we get to that con section. Plus, I think what's really unique about this specific title in the From Software collection is that it is straight up an open world game, right? So for me personally, I pretty much ended up skipping a whole beginner section. Just like there's certain areas that are still better to start out with, just because of like the kind of enemies and the levels they are at. But I didn't even, since I don't follow guides, I didn't even really follow it correctly. I ended up skipping a whole area, and that was still playable for me, but it was hard. And I think that opens up a lot of opportunities to kind of play the game in your own style. And another pro that I would have to list is right off the bat, they're starting up with some new mechanics. You know, old Dark Souls players, they'll feel at home with this game. They'll feel like, oh, this is something similar to what I've played before, but they've added new things to it. They've added new mechanics, which in one way, it actually helps with your adventure a little bit. It helps make things a little bit more beginner friendly, but at the same time, they're able to add more challenges to it by including those things, by having that extra difficulty that you wouldn't have been able to do before because it would have been too hard without the new mechanics. So they added two really noteworthy things. One would be just like the fact that when you do finish killing certain mobs sometimes, or certain enemies, you do get a slight refill on some of your potions, your flasks. And the other mechanic is they started adding something called Ashes of War, which lets you just customize your weapons and customize your shields, to include extra skills that are pretty fun to do and just explore, creating your own kind of like custom build. They also added something called like Ashes summons, which essentially you're able to summon like an NPC character that helps you defeat bosses in certain areas of the game, which at the end of the day, people could say this is too easy, but I think it's a good thing because it kind of gives like an extra entry level for beginners or people who have never played Dark Souls before. I think it's great. You don't have to use them if you don't want to, but if you do and you want to make yourself play the game at a more enjoyable pace or at a way that you like to play it, that's great, you know? So there's always the option there, and I think that's a great thing that they included something like this. Also with the flasks, I think it's great to have that refill because when you mess up, it's a little bit more forgiving in a way. It helps you kind of have this hope where normally you're like, oh no, I only have one flask left, or I have no flask left. Like, what's the point of continuing on with this dungeon or continuing on with playing without resting at a bonfire if I'm just gonna die anyways? So just having that hope that, okay, I just need to finish off this one mob, I just need to finish off this one thing, and I'll be able to, like, I just need to outplay the next thing to get this flask so I can heal up and continue. I think that's creates like another level of interaction and another way to kind of encourage you to outplay things, and I think that's super fun. Something else that I really enjoyed that they implemented in this game was that they actually allowed a way for you to respec your characters, so that you can try different builds anytime in the middle of the game. Being that it's such a long game, replaying the game isn't really as desirable as the other Dark Souls games in my opinion, but just the fact that if I'm getting bored of my build, or if I want to try a new build, or I have a new idea, I think it's great that I'm able to respec my character at any time. There is a limited amount of times that you can respec your character, but I think they give more than enough for you to really enjoy multiple builds throughout your first playthrough. And oh man, if you like bosses, I'm telling you, Elden Ring is pretty much packed full of bosses. There are so many that it's ridiculous, whether it's certain bosses that only appear at nighttime, or just open world bosses, or specific cutscene bosses. There's just so many of them that you pretty much get used to fighting bosses, I feel like, really quickly. Oh yeah, and did I mention that the lore is not only written by From Software, which by the way, they're really good at doing that, but it was also written by George R.R. Martin himself. I mean, obviously the way they tell the lore is still ambiguous. It's the way that Dark Souls does it, through items, through characters talking to you, and just through the more ambiguous cutscenes. it's there though. And when you play against these bosses and when you play against certain monsters, you can really feel that there is a lot of lore, a lot of background going through this, and it's that dedication that I really have to give the praise to. It's just the fact that they commit to it so hard, and the fact that the world feels like there's meaning to it. But man, did they do a good job at really implementing this open worldness to Elden Ring. They added horseback riding, which is really cool in itself. The way that they make horseback riding, it's pretty different from other games. I mean, there is horseback riding combat, and I love the way they did that. There's obviously pros and cons to it, and when they make you use your non-dominant hand to attack the other side, I feel like it really does feel like it to me. I mean, it's not really that magical per se, but I think it was just that extra little detail that made it really cool. Also, they implemented just like being able to see like if you've ever played Monster Hunter, you would know what I'm talking about. But it's pretty much just the fact that there's two different factions. You can see them interact with each other, or you can see two different monsters interact with each other, and I think that's really cool. Just like stumbling upon something like that in the open world, I think it really tells a story in a different way. It takes it to that like next level. And then the way they make you forage for certain things that you can pick up, they make it like kind of glow. And I think that was a really cool touch to not ruin immersion, but at the same time, you'd be able to immediately tell that, okay, I can forage this. I can pick this up. And through that, they also added a new item crafting system, which I think was a neat touch to the game. I think there's always been an issue with certain parts of Dark Souls. If you wanted to try to do archery build, or if you wanted to try using your items, it felt like it was so rare since there was a limited amount of them. But the fact that you can craft in this game pretty much solves that issue, pretty much makes it so that you don't feel like you're wasting items every time you use something. The quest system is still very much From Software like. I actually loved pretty much all the quests in this game. I like the way that you naturally can progress in some of them, and I also like pretty much most of the NPCs. I think they're very interesting characters, and I really enjoyed pretty much all their quests. There's a couple like major quests that really take the lead, and I do really think that it is really cool to just add to this kind of game. It kind of makes it a more three-dimensional game. Like pretty much every NPC feels like there's a purpose, and some of them are attached to endings, which brings me to the point that there are multiple endings in the game, so it does boost replayability. This is one of the first From Software games that I immediately after finishing felt like I wanted to play the game again, just so that I can try the other endings, just so that I can try more builds, just because I want to play the game and I don't know what to do with the rest of my life. And how can I miss this last pro point? The art and the soundtrack. People were complaining about the fact that it doesn't look like a next generation game, but I don't really care. Like, who cares? The art is so good in the game. It looks beautiful. The world looks beautiful. I don't care that it's not insane in the way like the graphics look. I think the way they did it looks amazing. I think the way the world looks is amazing. I think the particles they use, the textures, everything looks fantastic. On top of that, the soundtrack that they have made, the music, it's honestly, it's astonishing. It feels like it pretty much just belongs. And I think that's more than I can say for a lot of games. Now on to the cons. And I do have a good amount of cons. So the first one being that there are certain dungeons that feel a bit unfair. They're called the Heroes' Graves. and a lot of it is just you running. Like, actually, you just run from things that just one-shot you. And the whole point is that it's almost like a platformy kind of thing, except just using running, and like sometimes you only have like pretty much the second to make sure you don't die. And I think it wasn't very enjoyable. I want to say it just wasn't enjoyable. Felt like gimmicky. Felt like they added it just to make the game hard for no reason. They pretty much just wanted to make something a little bit more platformy, but it just didn't feel like it belonged at all. Which also brings me to my next con. I feel like From Software always had a thing for a platformy kind of game, even when there wasn't a jump button. And they did add a jump button now, which is great, but it's still a little bit finicky. The way that the platforming is, it's very finicky just because, well, the jumping mechanism still isn't great. You don't really have that much control. The way things are, like if there's a fence in front of you, sometimes you can barely get over it, and that can cause your character to move in a way that you didn't want them to move, and it's just not smooth. The platforming just isn't smooth, and I just wish that they would either remove platforming from the game, or that they would pretty much make it so that like it would be smooth. It feels really bad that you're outplaying mobs, outplaying monsters. You just killed a dragon or something, and then all of a sudden you have to like do a platforming before you can get to the next checkpoint. But because of a bug or because of a glitch, or like just the way that it's so like you end up killing yourself. You have to redo it. How anticlimactic is that? And don't get me wrong, I don't mind platforming if it's done well, but this isn't it. One of the pros that I had listed before was that there's nothing that forces you to do something first, pretty much. You pretty much are free to enjoy the game however you want it. And that it's better for beginners because of some of the things they implemented, which are all true. But I still wish they did hold your hand a little bit more in terms of guiding you to maybe the first tutorial spot, or maybe just telling you that there is a tutorial spot or something like that. Because when I got into the game, I pretty much ended up skipping the whole tutorial without even knowing I skipped it. And that was okay for me, just because I've played these games before, so I knew exactly what to do. But I've had friends play the game and then pretty much not understand what was happening at all, didn't know how to attack, didn't know how to do anything other than like pretty much just exploring with their buttons. But there is a tutorial cave and you have to go find it. And I think that's a bit too much. I think it shouldn't be that easy to miss the tutorial, and I think it should be okay for you. Yes, it should be okay for experienced people to skip the tutorial, but I feel like that should be an option, and I feel like they should have guided new players pretty much into the tutorial cave a lot better. And then along with just not holding your hand, sometimes the big map does work against it. Sometimes the fact that there's no direction and the way that it's such a big map, guys. Sometimes it can feel a bit daunting. Sometimes it feels like there's a lot of density in some areas where there's every little nook and cranny there's something to do, and like it's a whole maze pretty much, and it's like you really have to pay attention to where you've been before to make sure you're not exploring the same area again. And it can feel a bit much, and at the same time, since the map is so big, sometimes there are areas that aren't as dense. Sometimes there are areas with just monsters, but then there's nothing else there, and then it's like kind of a waste of time. And when you move around the map, there's just so much that I wish that they kind of spread it out more. I wish that they some of the denser areas, I wish they didn't condense it as much. I wish they kind of like spread it out, while like some of the other areas would have benefited from having a little bit more. Don't get me wrong, like the pro is still a pro, that it's a really big map and that there is pretty much a lot to do in every single place that you go to. It's just there are a couple areas that just feels a little pointless, and there are some areas that are, I think, too dense. I think there should be like a better balance. And I mean, I'm not saying that you have to spread it out evenly. That doesn't make sense either, because, you know, some places are cities, some places are dungeons. There's like areas that are meant to be more dense, but I think sometimes it's a little bit too much. It can be a little bit daunting. Another thing with that is, even though there are a lot of different environments and there are clear regions that are meant to evoke this different feeling, make you feel like you're in a different region, since the map is so big, I do wish that they either added more regions or that they kind of made it so that the regions changed faster, because sometimes it felt like some of the bigger areas, it felt like the same thing going on and on and on for like a long period of time. And I really wish that they made it at least so that the scenery changed or something a little bit more. And take that with how you will. Like, it does show how big the game is, but with that kind of resource, I feel like it would have been nicer to have a little bit more. I don't know, maybe I'm being a little bit unreasonable here. Another con is that it really did feel like a Dark Souls 4. Some of the weapons have the same name, a lot of them did actually. I get it, it's kind of like their own pattern and stuff, and you know, I guess don't fix what's not broken, but I just wish that there was more diversity. There was a lot of weapons, I just feel like I wish that they had whole new weapons. That makes sense. I just feel like they told us that they weren't gonna make a Dark Souls 4, and then the fact that they made Elden Ring instead of Dark Souls 4, I feel like they should have done a little bit more. I feel like they should have made new weapons completely from scratch. Even some of the monsters are very, very, very similar, if not the same. And that is, to me, a bit disappointing. Another big con for me is like, it was pretty much an annoyance, was that they took pretty much the best things that they learned from every single Dark Souls, every single game they made, and they implemented this into this game, but they also took the worst from Dark Souls 2 into the game. The fact that Dark Souls 2 felt like there was this artificial difficulty implemented in it, and it was one of the reasons why it wasn't as big of a hit with the fan base. They put this in the game sometimes too. It felt like sometimes there were these mobs that just were meant to cheese you. It felt like there was a lot of quote-unquote ganks, as in like there's just a ridiculous amount of monsters for no reason. Like the way they placed the monsters of monster placements, the enemy placements, sometimes were just placed in a way to make it difficult on purpose. It didn't feel like there was a purpose to it. It didn't feel like this monster was hard just because it's hard. It felt like, oh, we're just gonna throw 2 of these at you just because. And also, reusing the same boss but making you fight another one of them at the same time doesn't make it a new boss. Like, please, if you're gonna make a boss in this place, please be more creative. There's absolutely no point in making me fight the 2 of the same bosses. They're just making it artificially difficult, and I cannot condone that. I guess I cannot stand by that. I just don't think that's good game design. Along with that, there is the fact that I don't like the way that the game spikes sometimes, the frame spikes. It can get very bad, and I don't know what it is. I mean, the fact that my 5-year-old computer can play the game, it says a lot. But at the same time, it randomly spikes, not just in like graphically intense places. It just randomly, sometimes I boot it up and it spikes and I have to restart the game. And it's not like my computers can't handle it, because after I restart the game, it works fine. So I don't know what it is. I know that you know, with the art and everything, I'm happy with that, but the game should not be spiking this much. It really shouldn't. I also talked about how much I love the quests in this game, and I do have to give a caveat to that, in that it's the same old way where you really don't have a sense of direction of where to go. Everything is spoken to you in riddles, and there's no guide to your quest in the game, so a lot of times you can just miss it, and the only way for you to pretty much complete the quest is by going to look it up, making sure you're doing everything, and that sucks. I really wish there was some kind of in-game prompt for these quests, and pretty much, you know, maybe a marker or something. There are a couple things that there is one specific quest that I can think of that they do give you markers. I wish they did that for everything, pretty much. And I know it does take away some of the storytelling that From Software is going for, but I do think it would just be better for players that way. It would feel more complete. And I'm going to end it on pretty much the biggest con that I have for this game. There are a lot of bugs, whether it's like the mounting your horse sometimes doesn't work properly, or one time I spawned and the floor was just gone. I spawned into the game, there was no flooring, and I just fell, and I lost all of my runes. I lost all my experience, for people who don't know, and that's very frustrating, just because dying in the game is already frustrating. But I mean, dying because the floor didn't spawn doesn't seem quite fair to me. I've heard of Xbox and PS5 players, PS4 players, like console players. I've heard that if you don't quit out of the game properly and then make sure that you go back to the home screen and quit on that home screen too, I've heard that causes save issues, and I've had friends lose over 50, 60 hours of gameplay because of that, and I don't understand why they haven't completely fixed that yet. They are doing a good job in fixing a lot of the bugs and doing balancing stuff, but I just don't feel like that's the biggest issue. I feel like the people losing save issues and having to like replay the game, I think that's a bigger issue, and I really wish that they did touch that. So pretty much wraps up my review. To answer the question, is this game worth the hype? And I have to say, I really do think it's worth the hype. The game is amazing. It's probably one of my favorite From Software games. It's up there with Sekiro. Yeah, it's up there with Sekiro and Dark Souls 3. To me, this game and the other two, those are like my favorite. Dark Souls 1 always has like a special place in my heart, but to be perfectly honest, I don't think it was the best game made. But I really do think it's worth the hype with all the pros that I went through. There are a good substantial amount of cons, but I think the pros greatly outweigh the cons. But let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I do recommend this completely to pretty much any friend that's willing to have some kind of challenge. I do recommend this to people as their first From Software title. I think it's probably the best first From Software title. If you've never played any of the Soulsborne game titles, this is a game for you to start playing. And then for all my veterans out there, I think you would still have a blast just like going through and playing all the different builds. Build however you want to build, make whatever challenge you want to make, right? But yeah, that's it from me today. Peace.